Hello, welcome to another episode of Lessons from a Podcaster. Today, here with me, Gregory. Gregory, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Tiago.
So, uh, a while ago, we went to Podfest Berlin, which was a conference, a festival in Berlin around podcasting. And there we met the good fellows of Mackie, which is the ones that actually gave us this microphone that I'm using. And funny enough, you're using the same microphone. And there's no coincidence in that, right? Because
Yeah.
we made this partnership with them, and then we did a giveaway of that microphone, and you were the one that actually won the mic.
Yeah.
So tell me, is it the first time? Do you normally win things? Are you a lucky man, Gregory?
That is a really funny question, Tiago, because I enter a lot of raffles
Okay.
for items like this, and I've had some really good luck winning things
Okay.
over the last 15 years or so. I won a long-tail bicycle in a raffle.
Whoa.
And then just a few years later, I was at a conference, and one of the exhibitors at the conference at the end, they raffled off like their TV and DVD player and then a set of the DVDs of their lessons. It was a sort of an educational product.
Mhm.
And I won that. And I had to call my wife and say, I've got good news and bad news. So the good news is I won a raffle. The good news is it's not another bicycle. The bad news is it's a TV and I'm in San Francisco and I have to bring it home.
Whoa.
So I had to like carry the TV down the street from the Moscone Center to a FedEx and ship it. And they were like, we can't ensure that it's going to actually get there in one piece. And I
Yeah.
was like, well, for $50, I might have a new TV. So I think I'll do
Exactly.
this.
So
Yeah.
you're actually a pro. You're a pro in
Yep.
winning things. That's
You got to
amazing.
be in it to win it, Tiago.
Yeah.
So when I see
Totally.
those, if it's a product that I think I might be interested in, if it's a company that I'm interested
Mhm.
in, yeah, I put my email address in the hat.
Yeah, and I have to say that your sound is great. It's sounding great, and
Thank
we'll
you.
be covering that as well in this interview. How to
Yeah.
get the best sound out of whatever setup people have. But before we get into that, let's do the pitch challenge. So you meet someone in the elevator. They ask you about your podcast. What do you say?
My podcast is called Conversations on Careers and Professional Life, and it is focused on providing actionable advice for any job seeker. Specifically, I focus on students who are in an MBA program because I work on the career management team for the Foster School of Business full-time and evening MBA programs. But I have plenty of great advice for anyone who's seeking any type of new job and preparing for those interviews, as well as some great episodes in the back catalog that focus on topics like mindfulness, compassion, gratitude, and stress.
Amazing. And how or why did you start podcasting?
So I, for a long time, have wanted to have a podcast. And actually, I had a proto podcast way back in 2005. So this was really before the iPhone days. I bought
Yeah.
my first microphone. I would go to conferences. I was in the tech world at that
Hmm.
point, and I would find someone and I'd be like, let's have a quick conversation. And the first one that I recorded was a conversation with Chris Messina, who is known as the founder of the hashtag. He was the
What?
guy who invented the hashtag. Yep. And before he invented the hashtag, he was on my podcast. That was back in 2005 at Bar Camp, New York City. We recorded it after midnight, spent about 35 minutes talking about, I think we were talking about open source software
Mhm.
development and communities.
Wow. Maybe you gave him the idea that
No,
basically changed social media.
I don't claim to have given him the idea. Funny thing, I mentioned this on social media not long ago, and I said, my first podcast is sort of lost to history. I don't know where the recording is. I've had
Oh
10 computers
no.
since. And he was like, no, it's not. It's right here. But he was pointing to the blog post about the
Mm,
episode that was on still on my website, but the audio file
yeah.
I have not been able to find.
So you did interview him about inventing the hashtag. I've never actually thought
No.
about it. I didn't even thought that one person
Yep.
invented that.
He posted, I think in 2007, he was like, "How about we organize topics by putting a pound sign before them?" That was the tweet. His handle at the time was Factory Joe on the site that
Amazing.
is
That's
formerly
amazing.
known as Twitter.
So you are a teacher. You work with a lot of MBA students, and before we start recording, you told me that you use the podcast as a way to kind of forward students to learn about topics, so that you don't
Mhm.
always have to repeat yourself, right? As a teacher, I guess
Correct.
that's something that common. You need always
Yeah.
to repeat same lectures at least every year, every semester. But that's a great way, right? So you can always say, "Hey, if you want to know more about climate tech, if you want to know more about a specific topic, you can forward them to podcasting." Is that something that is working well for you?
Yeah, I think it's great. So I would say, two different types of episodes. Most of my episodes are interviews, and they really are. They come across as a casual conversation between me and maybe it's a faculty member talking about a specific topic that they research, like compassion, gratitude, mindfulness, or it's a conversation with an alum, someone who graduated our program, talking about their career journey, how they got to where they are now. So that's one type of episode that I have. And then I have a few episodes where it's me just reading a script that I have written that shares some advice, perhaps about how to highlight your strengths while answering interview questions in a job interview.
Hmm.
Or it's me, yeah, just reading that script. And usually those scripts come from when I've had the opportunity or the experience of sharing similar advice over and over again. I say, you know what? Let me turn this into a
Yeah.
script and then read it. And now it's available to everybody. And while I may still find myself saying that in the midst of a coaching appointment with a student, I can also use those episodes when we send out our newsletter at a certain time of year and we know that a lot of
Right.
students might be preparing for interviews. We can say, listen to this episode of Conversations on Careers and Professional Life
Mhm.
about highlighting your strengths in a job interview.
Right. And is that also a good way for you to find new potential students that they listen to you and they be like, "Oh, cool. Maybe he's a good
Yeah.
teacher. Maybe I should enroll in this course."
Yeah. So interestingly, I hear from a lot of our incoming students when I first meet with them over the summer before they actually start the 2-year MBA program,
Mhm.
and they say, I've listened to so many of your episodes and they were really helpful in thinking about how I wanted to do my MBA and whether I wanted to come to the Foster School of Business. So I think that I have as many sort of pre MBA prospective students listening to my
Wow.
podcast as I do current
Yeah.
students.
I mean, investing in an MBA is a huge, leap
Yeah.
of faith, right? Both time-wise and money-wise. So
Hmm.
the fact that you have a podcast, I guess it allows to create some trust, right? And a bond of trust even before they meet you. So I think that's definitely the great way to find potential new students, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, my role is not in sort of that recruitment and admission side of the equation. But I think that having the opportunity
It
to
helps. Hmm.
hear the coach they might be working with, and sometimes I do episodes where I talk with some of my fellow coaches. So they get to hear the way that we provide advice
Hmm.
and counseling to students on their careers. I think that it really does help give them a
Yeah.
sense
Hmm.
before they enter the program of what kind of people they'll be working with on their career journey, which
Hmm.
is as important to most of them, if not more so, than what they might be learning in the classroom from professors
Totally.
on
Yeah.
business skills.
Yeah. Now, tell me about sound quality. How important
Hmm.
for you is sound quality for a podcast? Is that something that you're very picky? Is that something that you're quite relaxed about? Tell me about that.
I think it's critical. I have turned off podcasts, even on topics that interest me, if the sound quality is not great. If
Hmm.
there's a hiss, if there's a lot of popping
Yeah.
noises, it sort of grates on me. And if I'm going to listen to something for 30 minutes or an hour, I want it to sound really good. And I listen to a lot of very professionally produced podcasts, from top podcast producers, whether that's NPR or Wondery. or Pushkin. And I think that people just have the expectation that that's what podcasts should sound like. If you listen to these high budget, professionally produced podcasts, they sound great, and you expect that that's what you're going to
Yeah.
hear as well. So I think it's really important. I've focused on that from the very beginning, using good microphones, trying to record in good rooms, softer rooms, so you don't get that
Mhm.
sort of like, oh, is that person in a kitchen kind of sound?
Right.
And
What does it mean
before,
to be a soft room? Like what does your room need to be a good room for you to record in?
yeah, I think smaller rooms are better, rooms
Okay.
that have soft surfaces. So if that's a rug or carpeting, uh, you know,
On a
drapes
wall?
over the
Mhm.
windows. Obviously, like if you could pad that in felt,
Yeah.
that'd be great. I don't have that kind of a budget. We have a room at the university that I use that is somewhat soft, but not as soft as I would like it to be. But I think that's really important. And, I always tell my guests, if you can, don't record at your kitchen table. Like if
Yeah.
you can record even in a bedroom, because I don't usually do video for my podcasts. If you can record in a bedroom, that's going to have a lot of softer surfaces and it's just going to sound better. When I was recording in person before the pandemic, I had some control over that. But once we sort of went virtual and I started
Mhm.
using tools like, we're using Zencaster now. I used to use Zencaster. Now I use Squadcast. We'll talk about sort of my stack. I have less control over that. So I've used certain tools to improve the sound quality of my guests when necessary. We can
Mhm.
talk about that too.
Yeah. But I guess the most important thing is, as you said, having a good mic and a good room. A good room is really
Yeah.
important. Now, I guess a lot of people, myself included, we struggle with echo.
Yeah.
And you already mentioned a few topics on how we can minimize this, have a smaller room, have maybe a bedroom, softer surfaces. Now, if someone is willing to invest some money
Hmm.
into soundproofing their room, first of
Yeah.
all, what should they attack first? Is it the corners, the walls, and what kind of material can you buy, and with a low to mid range budget?
Yeah, well, I think the easiest thing to do if you're recording yourself, if you're not doing an interview show, if you're just going to be recording yourself, you can get a shield. And I actually have one under my desk here and I do use it, but I can't use it when we're doing video because it kind of blocks my face.
Got it.
And it's basically a foam shield that wraps around your microphone and it really deadens the sound a lot. So,
Ah,
they go for under $100 on Amazon. There are a couple different types. There are also sort of soft boxes, which are bigger. The other thing you can do if you're just recording yourself is you can record in a closet.
yeah.
I have friends who have done that because all the clothes dampen the sound. And you
Or
can
under
also
a blanket,
record in a
right?
yeah, like a blanket under a blanket.
Yeah.
And you can also record in a car. And I actually was traveling and had to record some intros and outros for a podcast that I needed to release.
Mm.
And I went into my parents' car in their garage. I was staying with them, and it was like super quiet and was perfect. But I only had like 10 minutes because it started to get really warm in that car.
Yeah.
So, that those are some tricks that I have used. Now
Mhm.
going back to budget, I think putting something behind, so like I'm looking at my computer here, behind my computer. If I was going to go to the next step, you could even do something like hang a curtain, just like a heavy curtain that sort
Mm.
of you put some pleats in it and put that behind your desk. I've
So that it
covered hard
absorbs the sound right away, is that it?
exactly. Yeah.
And doesn't reflect on the wall.
Mhm.
Mm.
And I've done things like used moving blankets to cover hard surfaces, and
Okay.
also to isolate from other noises that might be in my house. I've like hung a moving blanket over the door to this room that I'm in. These are pleated blinds on the window here
Okay.
that soften, both
Right.
deaden some of the noise from outside as well as soften the hard surface of the windows. And then I think, if you want to really design something nice that's not just functional, like with sort of egg carton foam, which is,
Mhm.
again, relatively inexpensive, but something that's nicer. I've seen some fantastic felt online that is designed acoustic felt panels. And if I were, if I had the budget, I would cover this room in really nice sort of architectural felt.
Okay. So if there's unlimited budget, just cover the whole room, right?
Yeah, pretty
If
much.
not, if not, try to at least cover the wall in front of you,
Yeah.
right? And if that's not possible, go to a car or to a bedroom or to even a closet. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
those are great tips. Now, let's talk about gear.
Mm-hmm.
About microphones.
Mm-hmm.
What should I look for when buying a microphone?
I've used a bunch of different microphones for recording. I started off using some Behringer microphones that I had bought like 15 years ago, practically for use at my wedding, and I plugged those into a Zoom H1 N4 Pro digital recorder, and people were like, "You sound great," And they were not expensive. I think I bought 3 microphones for $95 in like a set. But I have also used Samson's USB microphones. I have one of them over here. It's the Q2U, which also has XLR output and has headphone monitoring. I think that's one of the important things to look for if you're using just a USB mic, is to have the headphone monitoring right on the device so that
Mm,
it isn't going through the computer and then coming back. And sometimes you end up with a little bit of a lag.
right.
And now I'm using this Mackie, and I really like the Mackie. So it's I guess, right, a dynamic condenser microphone
Hmm.
with a cardioid pattern. I have a Yeti by Blue that I've used. I don't like the sound of that one as much, but it's really good if you have to record a bunch of people around a table. And I
Right.
have done some of that kind of recording, so not on separate mics.
Hmm.
And um, the least expensive way to get into this is with a USB microphone. So like one of
Mm.
these Samsons costs under $100, and you plug it right into your computer and you're ready to go. Now with the Mackie, I don't know what it costs because I want it, but I had to get a USB audio interface, which I could have used. The Zoom H1 N4 Pro can be used like an audio interface, but it's a little clunky. I tried it. I didn't really like sort of the workflow and how it sat on my desk. So I picked up a Focusrite Scarlett, and I'm just
Mhm,
looking here. It's I think it's the 2i2
mhm.
model.
And it
And that
makes
was
a
like,
difference, the interfaces? You reckon that in comparison with just connecting, plugging it in to directly to the laptop?
well, if you have a XLR mic, you need the interface
Right.
to transition from XLR to USB. And from what I've read online, at least, the quality of that interface can change the sound quality of the
Mhm.
microphone. I don't know. The two experiences I have are the Zoom digital recorder and the Focusrite. The Focusrite has some other benefits. It's just easier to use. It's got physical knobs for things like gain
Yeah,
and
that helps. Mhm,
monitor sound. And it has like a little filter kind of thing. So haven't
mhm.
played too much with it, but it
Yeah,
changes the sound just a little bit.
right. Now, after recording, what tools do you use to edit and try to get an extra uh, crispy, perfect sound out of your
Hmm.
recordings? And as well, what do you use to then publish your podcast? What's your
Yeah.
stack basically?
Yeah. So I'm going to give a little bit of backstory. When I started this, I started recording and editing in Audacity. That's
Hmm.
what I used back in 2005 for that first recording. I
Okay.
used it periodically for other audio projects. I was kind of comfortable with it.
Hmm.
And I continued to use that up until just last fall. So I would record first when it was in person with the digital recorder. Then I started using, as I said, Zencaster, and I would download those 2 files and I'd put them in Audacity and I would do all my editing. Then I added to that stack a service called Ophonic. That's
Right. I know it. Hmm.
Auphonic to do like auto leveling and some other stuff. And I found that to be pretty cool and helpful. Like I had been doing all this stuff where I would, you know, put this filter on, and I would do normalization, and I would change this. It was a lot of post production that I was
Yeah.
doing.
And Auphonic
And
just takes care of everything, right?
yeah, it was
Mm.
great. And then just recently, I started using Descript
Mm.
last fall. And for those who don't know, and I think there are probably some other services out there that do this as well. And I think that Adobe has a product like this.
Yeah.
But again, I
Hmm.
don't really have a lot of budget. So I started using Descript, which costs, I don't know, about 15, $20 a month. And they actually bought or merged with Squadcast. So I switched from using Zencaster to Squadcast. That allows me to record with my guests virtually
Right.
through a web interface. And then the audio tracks go from Squadcast to Descript, and Descript
Directly. Mm.
transcribes them. And you can then actually edit the audio by editing the transcript as
Right.
if you're
Hmm.
editing a Word document. It's not perfect. Things like the automatic removal of ums and uhs doesn't always get it super clean, but so you need to do some adjustment. And then they have a studio sound sort of filter
Right.
AI thing. And I found that works really well. So
Interesting.
since I started using that, I only used Ophonic on one track so far where my guest didn't have the greatest microphone and I needed to boost that volume.
Yeah.
And Ophonic did it just really well.
Yeah, the beauty of AI is that now you actually more and more you don't need that good of a setup because AI just makes your sound amazing. I've tried with the Adobe as well, that is
Yeah.
able to just upload your sound and it looks great. It sounds almost professional, even if your mic
Hmm.
is recording, if your guest is recording with a cell phone.
Yeah.
So that is really incredible how this industry is changing. I'm
So
curious.
rapidly,
Mhm.
really. I mean, in the
Totally,
last
yeah.
year and a half, the game has completely changed.
And you just said that you're using Audacity since
Hmm.
2005. So it's been a lot of it's like almost 20 years of using this tool, and suddenly in a year everything changed, and you
Hmm.
switched to Descript, to Soundcast. You tried Alphonic, so everything changed in a year. So that's
Yeah.
incredible. I'm curious to know how you use Podsqueeze in your flow as well.
Yeah. So I discovered Podsqueeze, I think, pretty early, and started using it and was really impressed with the ability to create the transcripts, create some uh, content that I could use as the starting point. I'm a one person show. I actually did over the last couple episodes work with a grad student at another part of the University of Washington as a editor and
Hmm.
engineer, but I don't have unlimited budget. So pretty much all the content that's show notes, social media posts, descriptions, all of that I create. And at the very beginning, when ChatGPT came out, I was like, oh, I wonder if I can use this. And I would be like, okay, let me write my prompt and put some information in and see what it gets out. And then somehow I discovered Podsqueeze. I can't remember how. Sorry. Maybe there was an advertisement someplace, or I Googled for
Hmm.
something and I found it, and I was like, wow, it like does all of those things. So I put my episodes in there, I get that content back, I then do some editing on it. And recently I actually sent you a message and I was like, hey, have you thought about adding some type of like custom instructions? Because ChatGPT is returning things that sound a lot alike, and there's a lot of this
Right.
sort of flowery
Hmm.
language. And you were like, actually, we just did add something like that. Have you tried it yet? And I actually did just try it with my
Oh,
latest episode. And I have to say the output was much better. Now, I
oh,
don't
that's
take
great.
anything that Podsqueeze creates and just,
Copy
copy
paste.
paste
Hmm.
done, because I think that using these generative AI tools, it's really important to make sure that
Yeah, give your
your
voice.
own
Hmm.
your own voice is there, and that things haven't been introduced that weren't actually in the show, and so forth
Yeah,
and so on. So I do some editing, and I might take, oh, I really like this line, but it gives me a good start, and
yeah,
I'm not staring down that blank page. And I use it not just, I mean, I use Podsqueeze for this, but I use Claude, uh, from Anthropic or
Mhm.
ChatGPT for other writing projects to get over that blank page hump where I might be putting
Yeah.
in some ideas that I have. Like I even said, I actually did something pretty funny. I mean, this maybe I'm jumping into something that we're going to
No,
get
go
to
ahead.
later, but um, a couple months back, as all of this generative AI stuff was coming out, I was like, I wonder if I could create an entire episode that was created by generative AI.
Ooh, cool.
So I put in some notes into ChatGPT. It wrote a script. It was based on some things that I had written, and it was about using generative AI in the job search. So it was sort of very meta. And I put that in. I created a script. I then trained 11 labs.
Mhm.
I did a voice clone on 11
That's an
labs.
amazing tool. Mhm.
Yeah. So I took some podcasts that I had where it was just me reading a script that I had written. I trained 11 labs on that. So now I put the AI generated script into 11 labs and it created it, like did, and it sounded pretty darn good.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I don't know if you remember this show from the 80s called Max Headroom.
No, I don't know
Okay,
about it.
so it was like
Mhm.
a early sort of virtual reality, artificial intelligence kind of sci-fi show where this reporter, sort of action reporter, gets hit in the head by a parking garage barricade, and his like psyche splits, and it goes into the metaverse before there was really a metaverse, and now there's this version of him called Max Headroom because the last thing he saw was the sign that said
Yeah.
Max Headroom going into the parking garage, right? So I had this video like, I wonder if I could like face swap myself onto a video of Max Headroom. I couldn't figure out how to do it, but I have some
Mhm.
friends who are deeper into this stuff than me, especially on the visual side of things. And it created actually a short video clip where it's my face, but looking like the Max Headroom avatar with the mouth moving,
Crazy.
talking with my voice created by 11
Yeah.
Labs, text script that was written by
Yeah.
generative AI. And I put it up there on,
Yes.
it's out there on
It's
YouTube.
crazy.
And
It's
yeah.
absolutely crazy how this industry is developing, and I really don't know what's going to be the future. I don't know how things will
Yeah.
change in the next 5 years because certainly it will be very different than what we have now, right? Because everyone
Hmm.
can create a podcast just by typing words or just by, I don't know, asking GPT to write it, and then getting 11 Labs to sound
Speak
like
it. Yeah.
you or maybe a celebrity
Hmm.
or whatever you want. So that's incredible.
And I think that
Yeah.
that presents a challenge to those of us who really are passionate about podcasting, because my goal always is to bring valuable information to my listeners.
Mhm.
And there used to be a little bit of a barrier to bringing any content to people. If we really wind things back to like before the internet, you had to work for a publication, right? Where you had to
Totally.
write something, it had to get accepted and published in a magazine or whatever, right? Then the internet comes along, anybody can publish. And now we're seeing the cost of creating content has gone basically down to zero with
Yeah.
using generative AI to create content. So in a landscape, whether that's the written word on a computer screen, or whether it's the spoken word generated by robots, where the cost of content creation has gone down, the differentiator has to be quality. And I'm not saying that you can't create quality information that is read out by a synthesized voice, and that's going to be easier than sitting here in front of a microphone and doing multiple takes or whatever. But it is so incumbent, if you're going to create a podcast, it is so incumbent upon you to think about, am I bringing something valuable to somebody?
Yeah.
And I don't have tens of thousands of listeners, but anyone who looks at the podcast landscape knows that there's an extremely long tail phenomenon here where 5% of the podcasts get 99% of the downloads or something, right? And then
True.
it's everybody else. but like I did put my podcast into some service. I can't remember what it was. And it was like, hey, you're in the top 10% of podcasts
Yeah.
worldwide. And I'm like,
Spotify
oh my
also gave me
God.
those statistics with my own
Right.
podcast. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's like, okay, you're one of 250,000 podcasts out there,
Mhm.
250,000 podcasts that are, in that top 10% of the 2.5 million that are out there.
Mhm.
But I know who my audience is. It's not just my parents, but they listen to every episode. They listen to every episode. And first, as soon as that episode drops, I get a text message from them. You sounded great. That was your best episode yet. But it's the students. It comes back to the students or job seekers who are finding valuable advice and insights that are going to help them in their career.
Mhm.
I keep that top of mind with every episode I record.
Totally.
And that's my other piece of advice, other than focusing on audio quality, is
Focus on
for any
quality of content.
podcaster, know your
Mhm.
audience.
Right.
I'm a professional communicator, communication coach as well, and have consulted with people on communication skills. Knowing your audience is critically important to creating any piece of content.
Mhm.
And if you've got 20 people out there who are passionate about this thing that you're passionate about, and you feel that it's worth the hour or 5 hours a week that you're using to create that podcast, great. That's fantastic. If you've got 50 people, if you've got 500 people, that's great. It's just a ROI calculation that you have to make for yourself. Is this a hobby? Is this about generating business? Is this about elevating your personal brand? Is it about creating community? There are all kinds of reasons why you could be creating a podcast. And I actually heard one of your guests talk about this. I think he's the guy from the podcast school, I think is,
Mhm. Yeah.
you know, it's it's just absolutely true. Know why you're doing this, know who your audience is, know what your goals are.
Totally. Yeah. And as you were saying, even with Podsqueeze, you always try to tune it so that it sounds like you.
Hmm.
So in the end, if AI makes content for everyone, it will all sound the same,
Hmm.
and there's still space for our creativity and for humans' point of view. So I think in that sense, we are still safe. Let's see
Yeah,
until when,
absolutely.
but
And we
yeah,
are still so early in the game
yeah,
with all
there's
of this
still
AI
a lot
stuff.
to do. Hmm.
I had
Totally.
a post that caught a lot of traction on LinkedIn a week or two ago, just about some of the words that ChatGPT always likes to use,
Yeah,
and that makes
there are a
it
few there.
almost unusable for creating content because it's going to say, I mean, when I would use it for, creating content around the podcast, and this was coming out in Podsqueeze, which led me to
Mhm.
ask you this question, and probably led you to create the feature of being able to put in those custom tune instructions.
Totally.
It would say, let's delve into this
Yes.
world-changing, insightful conversation with luminary so and so, and it's like, come on, every time.
Yeah. Every
Um,
time Delph is
you know,
everywhere. I've never used
yeah.
Delph in my life, and suddenly I'm using it every day.
I know, right? Like that is the word that ChatGPT seems to love the most is
Yes.
delve. And then
Yeah.
some
There's
other
a few.
people that I was talking to about this, they pointed out moreover. Moreover is
Yes.
another
Yeah.
one.
And there's a
You
few
know,
that the ChatGPT is always using. It's a bit weird, but
yeah.
you're right. Yeah. Yeah, that's why
So
also we created the tuned voice. I think that's helping it as well a lot. Gregory, thank you so much. I think we've learned a lot from you, and there's a lot of knowledge here that our listeners can take from, and I bet they will now go to their car and record their show. Uh, Tell us again the name of your podcast and where can people find you.
yeah, the podcast is called Conversations on Careers and Professional Life. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google podcasts,
Mhm.
YouTube. We're on YouTube. We're not on Spotify for reasons that I'd go into in another
Yeah.
conversation. Um, and we're on Amazon Music. You
Perfect.
can also check it out at conversationsoncareers.com.
I will also link everything in the show notes of this episode. Gregory, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you, Tiago.
This podcast is brought to you by Podsqueeze, an essential tool for podcasters that creates show notes, timestamps, clips, and more. Visit podsqueeze.com and use the code PODCASTER for 20% discount in the first 3 months. We release a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday. See you in the next episode of Lessons from a Podcaster.